The JLR interview series.
Okay, so it's Friday, it's just after 7 p.m. UK time, and today we've got another special guest with us on Jazz London Radio. Her name is Regina Carter, an excellent violinist coming out of the United States, and it's really nice to have her on the station. So how are you this afternoon in your neck of the woods?
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're absolutely welcome. So the reason we've got Regina on today is because she's done a really nice CD which came out not too long ago. I think it was released in July, and it's with her Freedom Band, and it's called Swing States Harmony in the Battleground. It's got a very striking cover, so I recommend listeners to really check out this CD. It's really excellent, and we'll be featuring it on the latest releases and on Andrea Vicari's Jazz Doodles. So really, I just wanted to discuss this CD with you. I mean, we could guess what it's about, but it would be really nice for you to, to tell us more about it. So, how it came about and things like that. So, yeah, can you tell us about the project, please?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Last year, at some point, a friend of mine who helped produce the record, Kabir Segal, we were having a conversation. I worked with him on a project with Karen Allison, Shoulder to Shoulder, suffragette project, and I'd also worked with him with Arturo O'Farrill on Fandango at the Wall, where the whole group went down to Mexico to the border, and we played with musicians on either side of the festival. It happened at the border wall, which was an incredible and eye-opening experience. But I had another project in mind that I was doing about redlining, red zoning in the United States that had been going on, and we just started talking about voting, and I told him how disappointed and really angry I was that so many African Americans chose not to vote or choose not to ever vote because they feel like their vote doesn't matter.
Wow.
And we were talking about, in my household, I was born in the 60s, and my parents, it hadn't been that long since black people in the United States could vote. Mm-hmm. And my family took it, it was a very serious job. There was no, if you want to vote, it was expected that everyone of age would vote. And they would talk about the candidates, and not only the presidential election, but the smaller elections are just as important.
Yeah.
And they would sit us, my brothers and I, in front of the TV. We'd watch films about the marches for the civil rights marches, watching people being hosed, beaten, killed, had dogs sicked on them, so that we could vote. And I just don't understand, I can understand not liking a candidate or either candidate, but I vote because people died for me to be able to vote. I don't take that. It's not a privilege. It's a right.
Yeah.
And the moment that you allow someone to take a right, or you give your right away, you can't get it back. Once you give something away, you can't get it back. And so I feel. So anyway, this conversation happened, and Kabir asked, "What would you think about doing a record about voting rights?" And so the record had a whole nother feel, a whole nother direction as far as voting. And the more, once the pandemic hit, and we shut down here, and then everyone, other than African Americans, were forced, it was in their face to see the police brutality towards African Americans, was in everyone's face.
Yeah.
The whole dynamic changed, and so the direction of the record, it became even more important for us to vote and to pay attention to what was going on. And so with this record, I was trying to choose music from the swing states, because those are the states that really decide.
I see.
It's so crazy. So, and each of the musicians on the record is from a swing state. So
Right.
we went from looking at civil rights music to music from these states that people might recognize. And so yeah, it took a totally different direction once the pandemic hit.
Yeah, because that's interesting. I was going to ask you about, because naturally, if you're putting together a record, you'll record it and do all the publicity and everything beforehand. And as you said, this pandemic hit literally about 2 months before the record was due to be released, and then of course what happened with George Floyd, literally about a month before the record was due to be released. So that's all very fascinating. So the question I have for you is too, well, the first thing, what is red zoning? Because as someone who's based in London, not quite sure what that means. And the second question I have for you is, why do you think there's so much apathy, why people will not consider voting?
Well, redlining. Here in the United States, back in the 60s and before, blacks and immigrants were forced to live in certain areas. Mm-hmm. And if you crossed into another area, you could be arrested. And so in the black community, the community my mother grew up in was called Black Bottom. And while she said her family was very poor, and there were several very poor people, but she said they were poor and they didn't know it. Everybody in the community helped one another out. It was a close-knit. And some people were very wealthy. There were doctors, dentists, and there were teachers, everyone. But the black community was extremely close. And in those neighborhoods were jazz clubs. And so people like Miles, Ella, of course, Tommy Flanagan from Detroit, Barry Harris from Detroit. But all of the musicians would come to Detroit, and my mother, when she was old enough, they'd go and hear these bands and see these bands live. And so here in Detroit specifically, white people then didn't want to have to drive through these neighborhoods to get downtown. So what they did was they built a highway, I-75 it is, and they just destroyed these neighborhoods. These highways went straight through black neighborhoods, and people that owned businesses, black people were not, they weren't, what's the word I'm looking for? They weren't compensated.
Right.
A lot of times. And people, their homes destroyed, so they just destroyed communities. And I thought it was something that just happened in Detroit. And I started researching and saw that basically every major city in the United States, they did this. And a lot of times it was felt that the area where these black communities were, this area was thought to be financially viable, like they could set up new communities and charge all of this money, but they just displaced black people without any compensation or without them having any say. So that's what redlining, and that was originally what my project was going to be about.
Oh, really? So, and then you switched to what it became?
Yes.
What was the reason?
Well, just because voting, and I knew once Kabir and I talked about the whole voting.
It's more like topical to
it felt like it was so important really to do this. I'm still going to do the other record. Yeah. I'm working on that. So. Yeah. And as far as people being apathetic, I don't really know why. I think sometimes people get their information from the internet, and we don't take the time to really research what the truth is. And anyone can take a video or they can splice anything together, or and if you don't do your research, you might believe it. And if they say if you tell a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. But I also know in the educational system here in the United States, when I was coming up, I took civics class, which taught us, informed us about, different laws, the way things worked, government, voting, and they took that out of all of the schools. And I think it was done, it was designed that way. If you can the less you educate someone, the less they know. Yeah. And then you can control them.
Yeah, no, It's interesting. That's one thing I'm always big on education. So definitely agree with you and concur with you on that score. So with I watched the debate last night into the early hours. Do you think, like, with the state of how everything is, do you think more people really, compared to the last few elections, maybe since Obama in 2012, do you think more people turn out to vote this time?
I'm not sure. I hope so. I feel like more people are turning out to vote, and especially because we see that polling places are being shut down, so people are having to wait in line 11 hours and more to vote.
What do you mean shut down? Shut down? What?
There, because usually in your area you'll have several places you can vote depending on your zip code.
Yeah.
And so now they've closed a lot of those polling places. So all of those people, say maybe from 3 other polling places, has to come to this one polling place.
Right.
And so they're standing in line for 11 hours to vote. Some in the heat, and old people. These are senior citizens too that are having to come and stand in these lines and vote. And it's a way to deter people from voting. And, the post office had been slowing down mail, or mail hadn't been being delivered. So no one trusts that their ballot is going to get there in time or get there at all. And now I've been seeing friends of mine have gotten opened their ballot, to fill it in. And it's been 2 ballots in the envelope. And so, yeah, it's, just all kinds of things to try to screw up the election this year, so that Trump can say, see, it's rigged, it's this, And I'd say to people that don't want to vote or think their vote doesn't count or doesn't matter, I say, if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying this hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I've heard all these things as well, but, coming from you, it's like hitting home how bad the situation is. But also, it makes me think, because if this happened in another part of the globe, in a different time, the American president will be making all sorts of pronouncements and giving warnings. It just goes to show how things have turned and how it's gone crazy out of control.
Yeah, and we've allowed it to become that. When you don't pay attention, when you're not involved, and then the world can turn upside down. It's very easy, and then it's more difficult to get it right side up, again. And we just, I think we've never in this country, we haven't had war here on our grounds. We haven't really. Most people, the black community always has had to fight for something or march or something, but other people haven't. And so now they're saying, okay, their rights are being threatened as well. And we're starting to experience things that people across the globe have experienced.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for the younger generation. They're out there marching, and they understand they have to be out there.
But what I was going to ask you about your record in particular is listening to the tracks. The delivery is really quite upbeat to me anyway. There's like a lot of reflective moments, but a lot of upbeat moments as well. So I just wanted to ask you, is that reflected in hope you have for the future?
Yes. So many people are depressed, disgusted, angry, just every emotion there could be. And so I didn't want to put out a record that was dark like that. I want us to have hope and know that we can turn things around if we really are engaged and involved in what's going on. And so I wanted to keep it upbeat with these tunes.
And
the only one that's probably a ballad is, the only ballad I think on there is Dancing in the Streets. And that was an interesting, John DeFersa, the trumpet player, wrote the arrangement. That was a really interesting take on that tune.
Yeah.
Because, of course, I'm used to the Motown version by Martha Reeves. So.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And I love the Georgia on My Mind rendition. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us who the musicians are on the record?
Yes, on bass we have Alexis Cutrado and also Kabir Segal. On drums, the great Harvey Mason.
Oh, Harvey Mason.
On piano, the great John Batiste.
Yeah.
John DeVersa on trumpet, wonderful musician, arranger, teacher, and myself.
Okay, that's great. And the other thing I was going to just ask you is, I think we both come from a generation where music had a lot of protests in it. So
Right.
in the UK, we had it in a slightly different way. We had we had punk rock, and then we had reggae and all sorts of different things, especially in the 80s and 90s. And there's a lot of messages. One of my favourite groups, Big Audio Dynamite, for instance, their music came across as really light, but if you actually listen to the lyrics, it's really deep. They had a lot of things to say, a lot of political statements they made, and all sorts. Do you think that's something that really needs to come back and is coming back? I mentioned Juliana Hatfield a bit earlier. I think in the noughties, music was sort of getting away from that a lot. But the way the world is moving now, do you think it's time for artists to really come back to the fore when it comes to making statements?
Yes, and I think that many of them are. When I go through my Instagram feed or look on YouTube, I see many artists addressing what's going on musically. Just artists, period, not just musicians. And as you said, especially with with jazz, that has always been a protest music, if you will, a platform or genre in which to express what's going on. And so but I think more artists are. I don't think there's a way around it really, because this is just what's going on right now. But we're at a life or death point, I think, in this country, and so. And people are frightened and angry, and so I see many artists, many musicians addressing what's going on and just trying to use their music and their voices to get the message across and to get people galvanized to vote.
Do you think it's a new civil rights, or is it just a new movement, just in a more updated version?
Yeah, I think it's a new civil rights. Things never went away. It wasn't like, things were great.
Yeah.
There have always been issues, but this really put it in our face, and everyone really got to see it. And I just think George Floyd was the tip of the iceberg. It's like the pot just started boiling over. And young people are serious, and they're out here. They're not going to just sit back and say, they're very serious. They've organized themselves. They've organized different, so that there's many ways to help with this. Whether you're donating money, donating your time, making calls, and it's wonderful to see that they are so incredibly organized. And I don't think it's going away. I don't think it's. Because even no matter what happens at the election, hopefully, for me, hopefully Biden will win. But that's not going to make everything okay. No. It's not. We still have a lot of work to do in this country, and I just think it's going to. Yeah, these young folks are serious, and they're not going anywhere. Yeah,
and just bringing it back to the music, I suppose one pity is because of the pandemic, is that we're don't have the opportunity to see great artists like yourself actually performing this live and really getting people going as well. It has to be all done via social media at the moment.
Right. Yes. And I miss performing, in venues, and I had an opportunity last month to perform with my quartet here at the house. We streamed it to a college, and we were just so excited to be able to play music together. And but it's as horrible as the pandemic is and the shutdown, and I actually feel like if we didn't have that, if we didn't stop, it's like the world had to just take a time out. And it gave us an opportunity to look at ourselves, look at what's going on, and to really see beyond ourselves what's happening. And we either can be involved or we can continue to ignore it. But if we hadn't had the shutdown, things would have just kept going as they were.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, just on the side thing, but it's all connected really. One of the things the shutdown really showed is for people who live in cities, and when they stopped all the building and all the construction and all the cars and the pollution really subsided. Number one, and number two, you could be walking down the street, you could hear the birds singing, and all these things like we weren't noticing before was absolutely amazing. Everyone was talking about it.
Yeah, just things we take for granted. And I hope that when we come through this, that we'll remember. We won't just forget. I think sometimes we hold on to something for a hot second and then we forget and get back into our tunnel vision, our tunnel world. But we can't let that happen.
Well, first of all, I love how at the beginning of the record you got a get out vote message. It's really nice.
We gotta get right to the point.
Yeah, first track. Never mind the last track at the end of the LP or right in there. I just wanted to ask you about your music and about yourself a bit. I've known your music since the late 1990s. You played on some really nice records. I remember you played on Rachel Z's Room of One's Own, one of my favourite CDs, that is. So I just wanted to ask you, for those who don't know, like some of the listeners, how did you get into playing the violin, basically?
Well, when my mother felt that education and music were the two important things that she wanted my brothers and I to be involved in, and my grandmother, her mother, actually graduated from a university with a degree in piano pedagogy in 1915, which was very unusual for a woman and even more unusual for a black woman. And so my mom she didn't get the music gene, but she put my brothers, who were older, in music. And one day they said I walked up to the piano as a toddler and started playing a song that they had been working on. So their teacher tested me and knew that I had a gift, and she enrolled me in piano class, but I was too young. I was too young for formalized lessons. I would just like to make up songs. So when I was 4 in Detroit, they offered Suzuki violin or Suzuki strings. And my mom signed me up, and I immediately took to the violin. I loved it. And it was just, I found my passion at 4.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because kind of weirdly, the last few interviews I've done with some really big name musicians in the jazz world, they've been like saying to me, they started off playing one instrument, and then in their teens and sometimes even early 20s, they found the instrument that they will play for the rest of their career. But you really found yours right away, which is amazing. And about violin, obviously there's not that many violinists at the top of the game, so to speak. Who were you inspired by? Anyone, basically?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the European classical music, I was inspired by Yehudi Menuhin, Itzhak Perlman, and as far as jazz, I was influenced by, I loved Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, but then I became aware of jazz violinists. I loved, of course, Jean-Luc Ponty, Stefan Grappelli, Noel Pointer, an American jazz violinist, and then Stuff Smith is my absolute all-time favorite. Eddie South, Ray Nance, the list goes on and on and on. Joe Venuti. Yeah.
There's one, I haven't heard his music for a while, but I used to like, about 20 years ago, I used to hear his music. Billy Bang, I don't know if he's still playing. I'll have to check.
I don't want to put that out. I thought he passed away, but maybe not. Maybe not. I'd have to look. We got Billy Bang, definitely. Had you heard Charles Burnham?
No, I haven't actually. No.
Okay. He played with Cassandra Wilson for years.
Oh, right.
And then John Blake Jr., who I studied with, who used to play with McCoy Tyner and Grover Washington.
Wow. That's great. I remember years and years ago I saw Jean-Luc Ponty over here at the Jazz Cafe, and he's an artist that he doesn't come to London much, and we were so excited to see him. Just an amazing musician, one of my favourites of all time. Yeah. So the violin is a great instrument, and question following from that will be the inevitable one: are there young violinists coming through in America right now that we should keep an eye on, for instance?
Yes. Well, he's actually from France, but living in the U.S. His name is Scott Tixier. Mm-hmm. He has a twin brother that plays piano, Tony Tixier. Mm-hmm. Let's see. There's
Sorry, if I don't know if I put you on the spot.
Yeah, we're thinking Sarah Caswell. It's of course when we get off the phone, all these names will.
Don't worry about it. But I suppose the part I was hoping to make that it'll still keep going, basically.
Yes.
Like violinists will still keep coming through and making great music. Because like the cello, it really does add something different to jazz. You know, we always hear the conventional, sound with a saxophonist or trumpet player. So the violin always adds like a special touch. So yeah, great. Thanks for keep playing that great music, Ray.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks. So I'll just finish up and say really thanks for this interesting interview with Jazz on the Radio.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for your support.
No, thank you. It's a really fantastic record, and recommend people to go and definitely buy it. And keep playing the great music, and let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. It's that horrible phrase.
I know.
Thanks.
We're gonna have to come up with new phrases.
Yeah, we are, aren't we? Yes. Well, good luck for the rest of the year as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
The JLR interview series.